everyone, Jai Janendra and good morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Avantika and today we're going to be talking about Anekantvaad. We're going to dive deeper into what this powerful term really means. We'll dive into two other ideas that are connected to it, Syaadvaad and Naya. Today, the main goal is to help everyone understand what these terms really mean and also to clear up any confusion or myths that people might have heard about them. So, before we do anything, what do we know about Anekantvaad?
Feel free to write it down on a piece of paper.
It can be based on what you've heard, what you learned, and your own personal experiences. It doesn't matter, whatever comes to mind. Some things that you might have thought of might be on the screen right now. You might have said that Anekantvaad means that any situation can be seen in many different ways, depending on your point of view. And all of those ways are valid in their own way. Everyone's right in their own way, and we should respect different opinions. Sounds like a perfect world, right? Where everyone's perspective is valued and it's valid. We all live in perfect harmony. Sounds good. Are y'all with me on this? So, where does this idea of Anekantvad really lead us? Can anyone take a guess? Let me share something interesting before we go on, and this is a bit surprising. I once heard a Jain student explain Anekantvad in a way that I didn't really expect. They said that because of Anekantvad, we need to respect the belief and viewpoints of everyone, including people like terrorists. And it really made me think about the definition of Anekantvad. And furthermore, oftentimes you might have seen that Anekantvad is also used by people that don't follow the Jin religion and say such stuff like, if everyone practiced Anekantvad, we would live in perfect harmony. But I want you to think about this message of Anekantvad in similar everyday situations. For example, someone who is a butcher who runs a slaughterhouse. They might say that yes, my job involves killing, but this is how I make a living. A thief might argue that he steals or she steals because they're poor and that society gave them no other choice and that it's not their fault. Similarly, someone who commits cybercrime might say that they do it for the thrill and they get a kick out of these activities. It's exciting for them. And some even more serious crimes like arson or assault, the person might say that it was revenge, right? They hurt me first and kind of blame it on someone else, blame it on the revenge. And even in white collar crimes that sometimes we might turn a blind eye to, like tax evasion. Some people will justify it by saying, I run a business and I create jobs, I support the economy, and therefore I deserve flexibility within the rules. Now, if we look at all these situations from the individual's point of view, the reasons seem understandable to an extent, even reasonable. But this is where it gets tricky, right? Because everyone has a reason, everyone has a motive, and everyone has a viewpoint. No one does anything without having some sort of motive. And suddenly, it's very hard to say what's right and what's wrong when you try to use an ekantvad in these types of situations. But Jainism is very clear on what's right and what's wrong. Anything that takes us away from moksha is wrong, and we should avoid that. For example, hinsa, or violence, which is something Jainism is totally against, right? One of our main is ahimsa, non-violence. Stealing is also wrong, right? Because it's still wrong, you're still taking something away from something that's not yours. It's still wrong. And then the last three, anger, greed, and deceit, all fall under our char kashayas, which are big things that Jainism tells us to avoid. And Jainism says that these are wrong as well. So then, if Anekantvad is trying to teach us for different perspectives, those perspectives might actually clash with Jainism's point of view. And you have to think about it then, is Anekantvad wrong? Because Anekantvad doesn't aim to justify everything as okay. Instead, it's trying to teach different perspectives. Because understanding isn't the same as agreeing. And Jainism has always given us very clear values to guide us. So, it can get a little bit confusing, right? Because the justifications on the previous slide didn't really make sense because they contradict with Jainism's core concepts. So, what's the issue here? Is the Jain definition of Anekantvaad wrong? Is this really what our Tirthankars and Acharyas truly meant? Because it can't be. The answer is definitely not. And when you see on the right here, we're in a state similar to this little bear. He has a map, but he's holding it upside down. See, south is on top and north is on bottom. Because he has all the right tools to reach his goal, but he just doesn't know how to use them. And that's exactly what's happening with us. The problem isn't with the concept of Anekantvaad itself, and instead it's the way that we've misunderstood or misused it. We've gotten the right idea, but we're applying it in the wrong way. Anekantvaad was never meant to be an excuse for wrong choices. It's never been a free pass to say that everyone's truth is valid and everyone's perspective is valued, so anything goes. But instead, Anekantvaad has always been a Jain thing. It's always been meant to be used as a spiritual guide and a way to look deeper into ourselves, to understand our soul, and to move forward in the path of moksha. The thing is, though, as regular people who live everyday worldly lives, it can sometimes be hard to connect these spiritual concepts. So often our acharyas or other guru or maharajis will give us more quote unquote relatable everyday examples. But those examples were always meant to help us lead us inward and not to just justify the wrongdoings of the outer world. Anekantvad was never meant to justify mistakes, but instead take a step closer to truth, liberation, and moksha. So, now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's come back to the true meaning of Anekantvad. When you break down Anekantvad from its Sanskrit roots, it comes out into three parts. Anek, meaning many, Ant, meaning ends, and Vad. Now, Vad is usually the word that leads to a lot of the misinterpretations because Vad has a lot of definitions. But in the context of Anekantvad, it means paths. So, in other words, it simply means that there are many ways to reach the end. And you have to remember that the end that Anekantvad is referring to isn't some sort of worldly gain, right? Like the end of school or the end of your career or just like or the end of this life. Instead, it rather means the end of the cycle of life and death. At its core, Jainism says that until we reach Kevalgyan, which means absolute knowledge, our understanding of truth will always be incomplete. So it doesn't give you the right to say someone else is wrong when we ourselves aren't sure of what is right and wrong because we don't have Kevalgyan right now. So Anekantad was always meant for the journey to moksha. So let's use moksha as an example. For example, some person might feel closer to their soul and closer to moksha by reading their Jain scriptures or by reading some agams, right? Someone else might feel that same connection through dhyan and through focusing on themselves, through swadhyaya or through samayak. Someone might fast or do vrat or do different types of tap, and they might find liberation through vrat or fasting. And others might find liberation through their rituals, through doing puja or doing going to temple, all those different rituals that we have in Jainism. And all of these are valid paths. None of them are wrong, right? So it shows us, Anikantva shows us that all four of these ways, and there are many more, that none of these are the only right way. Instead, Anikantva justifies that all these paths are valid because they are used to attain moksha. And the key point here is that only if the goal behind them is moksha or liberation. If the purpose is something else, it doesn't really fit. So let's say that someone is fasting, but they're not doing it for their soul. They're doing it because they want to lose weight and they're skipping a meal or two meals every day to put themselves in a calorie deficit so they can fast and lose weight. That has nothing to do with moksha. That has nothing to do with leading yourself closer to your soul, right? In fact, it's even taking you away because you're going for worldly gains, for beauty or aesthetic. So you cannot use fasting for losing weight in Anekantvaad. Similarly, if someone meditates just because it's a trend on social media or their friends are doing it, it's not justified by Anekantvaad. It has nothing to do with bringing yourself closer to moksha. If someone studies law scriptures to become a lawyer or studies doctor books, whatever books that doctors use to become a doctor and make money, right, and have a career, that that doesn't lead you to moksha either. Those actions aren't justified by Anekantvaad either. And similarly, if someone does rituals, even if they are to Bhagwan for the purpose of worldly gains, for example, if someone says, I will do 4 hours of puja or I will do so and so ritual every single day for the rest of my life if I get 100 on my next test, right? Or if I get into that dream college I want to, or if I land that job and I get that promotion. If you're doing rituals for that kind of purpose, it has nothing to do with bringing you closer to moksha. And Anekantvaad doesn't fall into that. All of these worldly things are not what Anekantvaad is about, because it's always meant to guide us inward and towards our soul, not towards materialistic goals. So now that we spend some more time understanding Anekantvaad, it naturally leads us to another important concept in Jainism, Syaadvaad. Syaadvaad basically teaches us that everything should be understood in context, because meanings can change depending on the perspective and situation, and even by whom it's being said. But first, Bob has decided to make an entrance. Hi, Bob! He's been watching TV all day long for over 8 hours. Bob loves TV. But Bob's mom finds him watching TV for over 8 hours. She gets really, really angry. Here, take the screwdriver and go live inside the TV, Bob's mom says. Now, does Bob's mom actually want her kid to crawl into the TV and live there? Of course not. What she really means is that you're spending way too much time in watching TV. You should cut it down and focus on your studies. And this is actually exactly what my parents do to me too. But if someone hears that line without knowing the full situation, or as you guys sitting here, if I just showed you this slide without showing you the previous slide, you might totally misunderstand it and think that Bob's mom has gone mad, or that she's really mean and saying something super weird. And that's exactly what Syaadvaad is warning us about. To never take anything at face value without knowing the full context, because oftentimes there is a lot more meaning hidden underneath. Words, ideas, and even truths can change depending on how, when, and why they're said. And without hearing the context, it's very easy to miss the real message. And this was just a little cute fun example. But I'm sure most of you know the most common example of Syaadvaad, which is the story of the blind man and the elephant. So if you haven't heard the story, it goes that there were six, seven blind men and they come across an elephant, right? But they're blind. They don't know that there's an elephant in front of them. And each blind man touches a different part of the elephant and says what they think it is. Someone touches the leg and says it's a pillar. Someone else touches the trunk and says it's a rope. Someone says the tail is a snake, right? And so on, with every single person having a different observation of what they think the elephant is like. Also, their lack of vision shows how they don't have the complete knowledge, right? The complete knowledge of sight in this scenario, which can also be symbolically be used to show how we don't have Gyan. Now, none of these men are completely wrong, but none of them are right either, because all of them are right together with the correct context. It all depends on the context that each statement is with. That is the heart of Syaadvaad, understanding that truth has many different sides, and we need context to understand the full picture as we try to reach Gavelgan, because incomplete facts are not truth. Now, let's move on to the last part of today's topic, Naya. So far, quick recap, we've learned that Anekantvaad teaches us to see things from different perspectives, and Syaadvaad helps us understand those perspectives in context. Naya takes this one step further. It teaches us how to analyze these truths by separating from what is relative and what is absolute. And this is especially important in our journey towards moksha. There are many different subcategories of ne, but they mostly fall into these two main categories, Nishtane and Vivarne. These are the two main types. So the first is Nishtane. This is the absolute point of view. It looks at the soul and the true self, and the ultimate goal of moksha and Kevalgyan. It's very deep and very spiritual, focused on what's permanent and unchanging. This, whatever is said with Nishtane, will always forever be true, no matter where you are in the lok, no matter your age, no matter the jeev form you're in, the body you're in, it will always be true. The second is Vivarne. Vivarne is much more vast and much more nuanced because this is the relative or practical point of view. It deals with more everyday life. And Vivarne can, because of that, can to an extent change, or the examples that fall under Vivarne can change over generations and centuries and millennia because it deals with everyday life, which is always changing. It deals with our actions, our behavior, and the way that we interact in the world. So it's more temporary. In our Jain scriptures, Nishtane is often referred as the ultimate truth because it looks at things from a soul's perspective. Vivarne, since it's based on the outside world, is seen as a more transitory, sometimes even called false, but only because it doesn't reflect what's eternal. For me, often, and for others, Vivarne is more of a stepping stone to fully embody Nishtane, so they are both important in their own right. We can use Naya to figure out who this person is. Many of us know that this is Neil Armstrong, the first person to ever walk on the moon. From the Vivarne, he is a human, he has five senses, he's male, he's an astronaut, and we could keep on listing many more adjectives to describe Neil Armstrong. But all of these adjectives are temporary and will go away after he dies. But from the Nishta point of view, he is a soul, a pure Jeev with ultimate knowledge and unlimited potential. That is something that will never change, and it is permanent. Therefore, it is a Nishana. So, this is our conclusion, final. Let's put it all together and try to understand a Jain concept in Jainism, like Arihant Bhagwan. So first, we're going to look at Arihant Bhagwan from Anekantvaad, which is that the soul has many properties. Anekantvaad will tell us that our Tithankar, our Arihant Tithankars have Keval Gyan. They are about to go to moksha. They will often give samosarans out to the general public, and that they have 12 main attributes, which you can all look later in your Jena books. You could also say that they have destroyed all their ghati, which is your soul affecting gun. And the only gun they really have left is the Irish gun. But we didn't do it. And each one of these properties come with their own context, right? Syaadvaad. That every property is contextual. Using Syaadvaad, we give each part of Anekantvaad context to form a more complete sentence, and therefore truth. When we say what a Tirthankar possesses, we will say that they possess infinite Gyan, Keval Gyan. When we talk about what our Tirthankars are, we will say that they are those souls that possess those 12 attributes of a Arihant. When we talk about what they do, we will say that they give samosarans, they spread their knowledge, and they teach others about Jainism. When we say where they will go to moksha. When we when we ask, what have our Arihant Bhagwan already done? They have destroyed all their ghatikam, all their karm, right? So Syaadvaad, or context, gives us a more fuller definition of each property of Anekantvaad and leads us a little bit closer to truth. And finally, some of these properties are temporary, like our name, our body, or role in society. Those facts fall under Vivharna. Other facts are more eternal, like the soul and the infinite potential in our soul, called Nishchana. And that is where Naya helps us see by showing us the difference between relative and absolute truth. So, in the end, Jainism has always tried to help us understand that the ultimate goal is to recognize with our true eternal self. And one way to get to that ultimate goal of moksha is to use Anekantvaad, Syaadvaad, and Naya. Okay, so one more time, last summary. We learned that when we look at ourselves, Anekantvaad teaches that we have many different properties or qualities. Each one comes with a certain point of view. That's where Syaadvaad comes in, understanding things with context. But now everything's the same. Because some traits are more temporary, like our name, our body, role in society, and others are more eternal, like our soul and its infinite potential. And that's where Naya helps us by seeing us the difference between the relative and absolute truths. So, in the end, yes, Jainism helps us understand that all perspectives, when it comes to getting towards moksha, is the ultimate goal, and to recognize and connect with our true eternal self. So, the last half an hour has been so all of you can fully understand that Anekantvaad doesn't mean everyone's view is right. Instead means everyone's path that they go towards, going towards moksha, working towards liberation. Every single one of those jeeves paths that have gone to moksha, all of their paths are valid. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you learned something.